All right, so we left off here with the lysogenic cycle. So the lytic cycle, the one that we did previously, was where we talked about how viruses put their DNA inside of the host cell and then immediately get that cell to work, making more viruses. And then once those viruses get assembled, they burst out and destroy the cell. And we said that, the common cold is an example of where you can see this, where you have, your cells in your throat are getting taken over and then they're being destroyed by these viruses. So you get sore red throat from that cell death. There's another cycle, and this is called the lysogenic cycle. So the big difference here, lytic cycle, cell gets immediately destroyed as soon as viruses are assembled. Viruses go on and try and find another cell, and you have a very active infection with live viruses all the time. The lysogenic cycle starts out the same way. You have a virus that attaches to a cell, injects its DNA. But instead of that DNA just acting like a general telling the cell, hey, start putting viruses together, instead what that DNA does is it incorporates itself into the genetic material of the cell. So if you look at this section right here where it says incorporation of genetic material, you can see that red line right there is supposed to represent the viral DNA that inserted itself into the genome or the DNA of this bacteria. Now what's going to happen is the virus is essentially going to lie dormant inside the DNA of this cell. So it's not doing anything right now. It's not being harmful, not being helpful. It's just hanging out. But every time this cell divides, or one of its daughter cells divides, or its daughter's daughter cells divides, this virus is getting copied. So now all of a sudden the viral genome, the DNA that was inside this virus, is becoming more and more common as it continues to divide. And what can eventually happen is, when there's a weakened immune system or something else is going on, is that these genes, the little viral genome that are hanging out inside these cells, can get flipped on and they can turn into the lytic cycle. So examples are what you would expect to see in terms of pathology. So human impact of a virus in the lysogenic cycle. You would have long periods of dormancy where you wouldn't have any visible illness, you wouldn't feel bad. And this is where the virus is kind of hanging out inside your cells, it's replicating. Then you would have these periods where the virus does begin making viruses. It does become an active infection, and you would feel kind of crummy, and you would see some physical symptoms. An example of a virus that does this is the herpes simplex virus. So that's the one where it's an example of an STD, so it can be sexually transmitted, but you can also get it from any time, if you were to get blood-to-blood transmission for a person that had it, you would also have it that way. So, for example, one of the symptoms of this, if you have oral herpes, is you could get cold sores around your mouth. And so what happens with people with cold sores is they don't have them all the time. So you don't notice the herpes virus all the time. A lot of times it's just laying dormant. They cannot actively pass it on to other people. But then the virus will flare up. It will make viruses. It'll cause cell death. And then that's when you see the cold sores. And then it goes back into the lysogenic cycle, goes back to being cool and chill. So two different types. Lytic cycle, explodes cells. Lysogenic, hides inside the genome, replicates with the cell. A term that we're going to come across, so I wanted to kind of show it to you, is one of the things I mentioned is that you have viruses, and viruses can use DNA or RNA as their genetic code. Anytime a virus uses RNA as its genetic code, those are called retroviruses. All right, so the last thing we're going to look at, and this is number 6 in your notes, is we're going to look at prevention of viral infections. So how do we prevent viruses? So what you are going to do is, you're going to go back to Google Classroom. I have posted this video. It's called How Do Vaccines Work? Now, what you need to get out of this is, number one, you need to know how vaccines work. So how are they designed, and what part of our body are they sort of exploiting in order to give us this immunity, this sort of prepared ability to fight viruses before we come into encounter with them. Number 2 on here, I've already outlined for you. This is number 6 in your notes. But you want to follow along with the video and make sure you understand the different types of vaccines that we have. What you guys are going to do once you're done, and this is in Google Classroom, is you're going to take a look at how viruses, specifically HIV, can be very difficult to develop vaccines for. And you're only going to be able to answer those questions if you understand what vaccines are and how they work. So pause your video now. You're watching this video first, which is linked to in Google Classroom, making sure you understand what vaccines are and what the different types are. And then afterwards, you're working on your HIV reading. Email me if you have any questions.